introduce our next speaker. In 1880, the Republican candidate for president was a dark horse named James A. Garfield. Since that time, no one has gone directly to from the House of Representatives to the White House. We have with us at this time a member of the House who thinks that it's time to end the Senate's monopoly on the Democratic presidential nomination. Someone has said that if there's a jock vote in America, our next speaker should get that. He is a superb athlete who has starred in basketball at the University of Arizona and with the Denver Nuggets. More significant, however, from our point of view, is that since he came to the House of Representatives in 1961, he's compiled a progressive and a constructive voting record. In the 1972 as well as the 1974 sessions, both COPE and MNPL have rated him 100%. So obviously, he's our kind of guy, and we're happy to welcome him to this 1976 session of our MNPL Planning Committee. Brothers and sisters, it is my pleasure to present the pride of Tucson, Arizona, Congressman Udall. Congressman. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Well, it's really great to be here with my friends of the IAM, and I appreciate that reference to my athletic career. You know, John Kennedy said once he'd been a junior varsity halfback at Harvard, and he said a presidential campaign will do wonders for your athletic record. He said he's now being introduced as an All-American and whatnot. The other night I was introduced as one of the great professional basketball players of all time, and the fact is that I played 1 year for the old Denver team that went bankrupt. We lost 16 straight games to set a professional record, and I was a second-string player on that club. But when you run for president, you see it gets better all the time, and things got to get better. You know, if you're in the United States Senate, you're running for president all the time, but if you're in the House of Representatives, it never happens. I got into this race in a strange and crazy kind of way. 45 members of the House of Representatives signed a document urging me to run. This was nearly 2 years ago. And I'm very proud of that. I would hope maybe that would say something to you. These are the guys you work with day by day who see you under stress and pressure. And so whatever happens this year in 1976, I'll be very, very proud of that. I'm going to spend most of my time this morning trying to respond to your questions, if you have any, but I do have some things on my mind, and let me have at it here for just a minute. I think it's good that you're here in Washington, and I welcome you to this city on behalf of Nelson Rockefeller and Simon and Ford and everybody else, and hope you have a good time. Lyndon Johnson used to tell the story of this little town had a football team, and they were playing a big town, and the little town only had one big guy, and his name was Rodolfo. And they got the ball, and the coach shouted, "Give the ball to Rodolfo." And the quarterback came out of the huddle, and one of the little guys had the ball and went into the line and got creamed and gained nothing. And the coach was angry, and he shouted again, "Give the ball to Rodolfo." And they came out of the huddle, and the same thing happened. The little guy had the ball and got clobbered, and he shouted again, "Give the ball to Rodolfo." And the quarterback shouted back, "Rodolfo don't want the ball." Well, that's not exactly the problem that we have here in the Democratic Party in the presidential campaign of 1976. Everybody wants the ball. And you're going to see a lot of us here during your visit to Washington. Size us up, set up some tough criteria, find out where you really want to go in 1976, and then help make some choices. Because the choice we make this time is very important. A year from today, somebody's going to be down there starting a new term. Somebody will be at the White House, and they'll be making decisions on jobs and taxes and foreign policy and Medicare and health and everything else. And it just might be Gerald Ford. We don't throw out incumbent presidents in this country very often. It's happened once in my lifetime when we unloaded an incumbent president. His name was Herbert Hoover. And Gerald Ford reminds me of Herbert sometimes. I think he's got the same economic advisors that Hoover had. Or this fellow who's down there a year from today starting up a new administration might be, God help us, Ronald Reagan. You Californians, I want to thank you a hell of a lot for getting him into the race. He may do us a favor. I just got back from New Hampshire where he's running a pretty tough race. But if we do it right, if we do it right this time, it just might be a Democrat. We've been blowing this thing the last couple of times around. Somebody said that when the Democrats get up a firing squad, they always gather in a circle. And that's about what we did the last time around, last couple of times around. And we've got our good old friend George Corley Wallace up here in Boston preaching his message of brotherhood and love and unity and everything. One of the things I'm proud of is my record in the Congress and my record in taking on the tough ones. I went out to the Communications Workers Convention in San Diego last spring and took on the Wallace question. A lot of candidates were moving around this thing and talking in different ways and doing a little dance. And, it's a pretty tough question. What are you going to do about the Wallace problem? You go to your shops and factories and he's got some appeal. And I decided a good year ago that the Wallace thing had to be confronted and had to be confronted directly. I don't believe that party loyalty is everything, but I damn well believe it's something. And if you're going to belong to a political party, every 10 or 20 years you might give it a break or support one of its candidates. This is the fourth time around that Wallace has been involved in a presidential campaign. And what the track record, what the scoreboard shows is that in 1964 he turned his back on Lyndon Johnson. In 1968 he played around with our nomination a while and indicated he might want it. And then he went off with old Curtis LeMay. You remember old old Newcomb LeMay. Went off with him and beat Hubert Humphrey. That was his contribution to our party. And a lot of you out there damn near saved it. If we'd had another week, we would have stopped him from doing that to us. In 1972, he got beat fair and square by George McGovern in an open contest, turned his back on him and wouldn't support him. And now in 1976, he says, my fellow Democrats, I love you, and I want your nomination, but if I don't get it, I get to write your platform or pick your vice president, and if I don't get to do that, I may go off and beat you again with Ronnie Reagan or some other good, loyal, liberal Democrat of some sort. And I think he owes us better than that. I think if he's going to run in our party once in a while, every decade or two, he ought to give us a break. And I went to California and said so before the communications workers. And I think we got to confront this thing. Because the party of John Kennedy and Harry Truman and Lyndon Johnson and the things we stand for are not the things that George Wallace stands for. He's got every right to run. Anybody's got a right to run in this country. But I think we ought to take him head on and discuss his record, and we ought to nominate a candidate and fight this thing out the way that Harry Truman did in 1948 when he had a third party and a fourth party and still pulled it off. And we can do it this time around in the Democratic Party. But you can't just nominate anybody. You can't just go on any old platform. You can't have any old level of division. You damn well better do it right this time around. And so the time of choice is coming very soon. A little bit about my background, if I may, because I think when I get to be known, I seem to do very well in this contest. And the problem is coming from a little state and coming out of the House of Representatives, it's a little more difficult than being a United States Senator or a governor. But I'm proud of what I've done in Arizona. I'm a lawyer and a banker, and I've been able to survive out in Arizona in Goldwater country. I'm the last survivor. I know how General Custer felt when those Indians came down for the massacre. We used to be a one-party Democratic state out there, and now we're a one-party Republican state, and I'm the only survivor, and I've kept my principles, and I've fought for progressive legislation. I've had a 100 COPE record these last two times around. You try, and I've got a 90% COPE record lifetime. That's no great feat in Michigan. You're not going to get elected if you don't have a pretty good COPE record there. But I claim to have fought the good fight in Arizona, and I'm very proud of the labor support I've had in that very reactionary state. Goldwater is a friend of mine, although we don't agree on very much. Goldwater and I are both friends of the Indians. I represented a fifth of all the American Indians at one time, and somebody, Goldwater was telling about the politician who went to the Indian village and made this speech, and he said, "You Indians vote for me and we get schools and hospitals for the Indians." And they shouted, "Gumwa, Gumwa." He said, "You vote for me and we get the clothes and shoes for little children." They shouted, "Gumwa." He said, "You vote for me and we put gas heat in every teepee." And they shouted, "Gumwa." And when he was finished, the chief came forward and said, "You white man, great friend of Indian, you must come down to the corrals. We're going to make you a present of a pony." He said, "Be very careful, don't step in the gumwa." That was not the subject I came to discuss, but we're hearing a lot of that out of the Republican administration down here today. We're getting it in the budget. You know, this country's in trouble. We're really in trouble. Gerald R. Ford, Rockefeller, and Simon, and these people, they really believe that you got to choose between putting people to work and inflation. They believe this old Phillips curve and the old economics that says that the only way to fight inflation is to let interest stay high so that construction work goes to hell and people can't own homes and people are out of work. 8 million people today out of work, and these aren't statistics, they're human beings with hopes and dreams and kids to send to college and all of the rest. 8 million people. You know what his goal is 2 years from now? He says if all goes well, if this great Ford economic system plan works, if all goes well, we're going to have 7 million people unemployed, 7.5 next year, and maybe we get down to 7 2 years from now, God help us. Well, what are people supposed to do in that interim time? If you happen to be black and a teenager in one of the big cities, it's not 8 or 9% unemployment, it's 35 or 40% unemployment. How can you hold a country together when you build an economic system and let it decline to where it says to a whole generation of young people, we can't use you, we don't need you, there's nothing useful for you to do. And yet they accept this old dogma and doctrine. And I reject it. We can put people to work. Good Lord, there are carpenters and bricklayers and construction people out of work, and people need homes. What do you mean we can't get the people back to work in this country? Harry Truman had 1% inflation and 2% unemployment when he handed it over to Eisenhower. In John Kennedy's day, we were down to 4% unemployment, and we had about 1.5%. Imagine that, a whole year, 1.5% inflation. What do you mean we can't do better than this? But we're going to have some new programs. We're going to have to change, and we're going to have to give up this counsel of despair that says that we've got to choose, we've got to have some kind of a trade-off here so you can't put people back to work. And sure, we got problems in this country. We're running out of oil and gas, and we better face up to it. The domestic production of oil peaked in 1970, and it's gone down every year, and it's going down this year. And when Alaska Pipeline comes on the line next year, the oil we finally get back will not even start to recompense the loss in domestic production in Texas and Oklahoma and other places. And every scientist will tell you this, every geologist. Sure, we got to do some more drilling. And yes, we'll find some more. But this is the most over-drilled country in the world, and there's some out there to be found, but we've got about 25 or 30 years to make the shift to other sources of energy. We've got some tough, hard questions to answer. We've got to make some answers on nuclear power. We've got to really get going on research and development on non-nuclear sources of power. But we can make these kind of tough choices, and we can look back a few years from now and say that we did it right. I really believe that about every 30 years somebody's got to come along and shake up this economic system of ours. Old Teddy Roosevelt at the turn of the century, the robber barons dominated everything. Nelson Rockefeller's grandfather had control of about 95% of all the oil in America, and he came along and busted them up so the system could work again, and it did. 1933, we were flat on our backs. That economic system in the 1920s had quit working, and Franklin Roosevelt didn't say, sorry, I can't do anything for you. We've got to leave people out of work and let the ship right itself the way Hoover believed. He said we're going to put people to work, and we did. We're going to have housing programs so that we can own homes, all of us, and my generation could believe and dream that you were going to own a home, and most of us do. But 85% of the American people can't afford homes now. Roosevelt insured the banks, and the stock market, regulate the stock market. We're going to need a new kind of change in the 1970s and 1980s because this economic system isn't working. 200 companies. It's just happened the last 30 years. We used to have competition. You know, I believe in competition. 200 big corporations now control about 70% of all the manufacturing in this nation, and they're getting bigger. And they're not interested in efficiency. They're not really interested in more jobs. They're interested in some of the big profits that these high binders who put them together are able to make. And this has got to go. I went before the American Bar Association a year ago with a specific plan to break up the big conglomerate industries. We'd all be better off. And I'm not talking about socialism. I'm not talking about nationalizing industries. I'm talking about good old American competition, Theodore Roosevelt and all of the rest. There's about 4 drug companies that control the price of drugs and medicines. And they make a pill for your arthritis for 8 cents, and they charge you $1.08. There isn't any competition in this business, any essential competition in the drug business. And the same is true in steel. Steel prices go up. It doesn't matter whether you've got a recession on. Steel prices are going to go up every year. And we've got to go back to fundamental basic principles and break them up so that the little guy who owns a hardware store or a trucking company and would like to take his son in and build up the business is going to have a chance and not be run out of business by some big conglomerate based in some far-off city. We're going to make this American system competitive again. Oil, we run on oil. But we're the only nation in the free world that lets 7 oil companies make energy policy. I don't make energy policy. Gerald Ford doesn't make energy policy. You don't really, and none of you, citizens, all of us, none of us have a hell of a lot to do with energy policy. 7 big oil companies make energy policy. And the Italians don't let it happen, and neither do the British and the French or anybody else, but we do. And I went before the National Press Club last spring with a specific bill. We're not going to do antitrust suits. They take forever. We're going to have a program of restructuring the oil and energy industries so that we have competition once again. Exxon now, they drill it and produce it. They own the pipelines and the tankers. They own the refineries, and they market it. And they play all kinds of Mickey Mouse games. They'll run full-page ads telling you how great competition is, and then they'll say, oh, we have got to raise the pump price for the guy going to work at some shop at 3 cents because the refinery price has gone up. They don't tell you it's their refinery. They've raised the price on themselves, and they're passing it on to you. And so my bill is very simple. The bill says that it's going to be illegal after 2 years for anybody to be in more than one segment of the oil business. Get in or get out. Break it up. Get companies that are in different segments, so you've honest to God got competing refineries. I can take you out to Iowa or Illinois or almost any place, and you find some towns where gas prices are 6-8 cents higher than the town down the road. And you always find that where the prices are lower, you got some independent stations in town, and they keep the big boys honest. And that's the way we're going to keep them honest in the oil industry, to break them up and get competition between the different segments. There's nothing radical about it. It's American. You know, I believe in free prices. I believe in free markets. But if somebody's going to fix prices, if it has been decided that prices will be fixed, and the question is, who'll do the fixing? And the answer is the Shah of Iran, or 7 oil companies, or we, the American people, through our free government institutions, and I damn well say that we do the price fixing. And that's what that fight was all about in Congress on decontrol. There's no reason why we've got to have $14 oil. The oil companies can make a bundle on $7. They ought to make profits. It ought to be profitable to drill for oil. But it ought not to be outrageously profitable to simply rip off the American people because some oil-producing countries have decided to have $13 or $14 oil. Now, I'm going to do one more thing in the energy field. You know, I took on the coal companies this last 2 years. We're trying to get a strip mining bill so we could put the land back. We need more coal. We ought to burn it. We ought to learn how to burn it cleanly. But these coal companies want to rip up the land. Any of you from West Virginia or Appalachia or Kentucky, it makes you cry. Fishing streams out there and good mountains that we ought to have. We ought to put the land back and get the coal out. But I found in the course of fighting this fight with Gerald Ford that 4 oil companies have now bought up 35% of the coal in America, the coal reserve. And they're into uranium. And they're into solar. And if we ever learn how to make energy out of horse manure, you'll find they got all the horse manure lined up. And, yeah, Gumo, you betcha. You betcha. And so my bill provides there's going to be illegal to be in more than one fuel segment of the energy industry. If you're in oil, stay in oil and compete. If you're going to be in uranium or coal or some other segment, let's break them up in that direction. So these are some of the kinds of things that are going to be done. This country's going to change. We've always changed. The 70s and 80s are going to be different. This great period of growth and prosperity of the last 30 years was based on cheap oil and cheap energy and cheap land and cheap resources. And it was a great time, and we had a lot of growth and a lot of prosperity. But it's all gone now. And part of this problem of inflation is that we're facing a loss of oil and gas in the world. We're going to find out that copper and timber and land and iron and everything else aren't as plentiful as they once were. We're going to have to use them more carefully. We can make iron out of scrap much more easily and with less energy than we can dig for virgin ore. We can recycle paper. We can learn to be thrifty with the part of the world's resources that we have, so we're not having to pay high prices to foreign suppliers. But we're going to change. If we do it right, our lives are going to be just as good, and they might be a little bit better. But Gerald Ford doesn't understand any of these things. He doesn't even know what you're talking about when you discuss these problems. And yes, we're going to have a new job mix. The job mix has always changed. Labor has been progressive. Labor's been for change, constructive change in America. I can take you to a shop or a factory or out on the construction site today, and you're using tools and materials and processes that nobody dreamed of 30 years ago. All kinds of machinery that we didn't have 30 years ago. And what makes you think the 70s and 80s aren't going to be like that? So let's not be afraid of change. I don't think we're going to build as many interstate highways. We built a good system the last 20 years. We need it. We ought to complete it and fill in the links and some other kinds of things. But we can have that kind of a program for mass transit, and for rebuilding the railroads in the next 20 years. How about having a dream of an interstate railway system that works and doesn't derail at 10 miles an hour the way half the Penn Central trackage does up here? The job's in that. So, let's lift up our eyes a little bit. Every generation of Americans has had to change, has had to do the things differently, and we're not going to be any different from any other group. But the central ingredient we need in all of this is leadership. Leadership that looks ahead. Leadership that knows what's good in America. Leadership that's got common sense. Leadership that'll stand up to the big interests the way I've had to in my years in the Congress, the oil boys and the coal companies and all of the rest. So I'm in this race, and I'm in this race to stay, and I'm proud of my record with labor, and I want to have your help and support. And I hope you look us all over and set up some tough criteria. Which is the guy that's going to fight the fights? Which is the guy that's going to stand up when times are tough? Who can lead this country and bring forth the new ideas that we need in the 70s and 80s? Who can restore the trust in American life that we seem to have lost? Can't believe in your leaders anymore. Take a look at all of us, but for God's sakes, let's do it right this time. Let's win one for a change. I am glad to be with you here today, Mr. Vice President. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Congressman. As you noted, he had indicated at the very beginning he was willing to answer your questions. I would suggest that you make your questions as brief and to the point as possible, and following custom, state your name and location before asking the Congressman the question. Now open. We haven't got anybody that can be brief and blunt. I hope I didn't put too much of a limitation upon those questions.
Throw me a softball, somebody.
No. Would you take the mic, please?
Mike Rayo, New Haven, Connecticut. I guess I'll ask you the same other question I asked yesterday. What's your stand on gun control nationwide?
Well, I represent Tombstone, Arizona, where they shoot them up for the tourists every Monday morning, and I do not favor a federal registration law. I don't think it work. I do not favor a bill, any federal action to outlaw the private ownership of handguns. I was a rifle instructor in World War II, and I taught my own kids to shoot guns and so on. I don't know there's a big movement building up in this country for gun control. I used to get 1,000 letters to one, and now it's a little bit closer, but my position has been consistent on this issue. If they don't have a question, maybe I can tell them. Maybe I can tell them another Indian story.
They like that.
Bill Cockle from Scranton. And one of the latest vetoes by our incumbent has been the Health Education and Welfare Bill. I think it's H.R. 8069. And if legislative information is correct, this vote on an override is going to come up on the 27th, which is next Tuesday, unless it's been changed. Now, this is going to have a direct effect on the working people. As far as mental health centers are concerned, I know there's over $2 million in staffing centers and over $1 million in training centers alone. This health and welfare education bill, health education law, which will be eliminated if this isn't overridden. Now, the two questions: is it still coming up for a vote on Tuesday the 27th? And if it is coming up for a vote on the override, what are its chances, and what are you doing about it?
I was told yesterday that the vote was still scheduled for the 27th. I don't think there's any problem in the Senate, where it passed overwhelmingly. The House has been a little bit more reluctant to override. We had 92 votes, I think, in support of the President when it passed the House the first time. It's critically important that we override this, and I'm going to vote. I voted for the bill, and I'm going to be there and vote to override. It could be close. I think we can win it, but it could be close. You know, you can get a third of the people against almost anything. It's really very easy to sustain vetoes. I went back and made a study, and you know, since Franklin Roosevelt, year in, year out, Democrat, Republican, how many vetoes are overridden? Would you think 15% or 20% or 30%? The answer is 3%. 97 times out of 100, the veto is going to be sustained. We've overridden more Gerald Ford vetoes in 18 months than we overrode Nixon in 5 years. We've overridden more Ford vetoes than Franklin Roosevelt was overridden in 12 years in the presidency. So we haven't done badly as a Congress. But he can make them stick most of the time. That little stamp that he has down there that says no is worth more than 280 congressmen, and it's worth more than 66 senators. He can make policy and we can't. And it's a hell of an oath, you know. He doesn't have any mandate from the people. The last mandate he had was out of Grand Rapids, and it's 3 years old. And we had a mandate from the people of the United States in 1974 to make some changes. The only way we're going to get some changes is elect a Democratic president. I think you all know that. There are times in our national life when you got to move. People want to go slow lots of times, and they elect a Republican president, a Democratic Congress, and then they want to move. 1965, we were passing bills every day that had been waiting for 20 years, aid to education and Medicare and everything else. I want to be in there January a year from now. Somebody's going to be down there a year from now. And I'd like to be down there starting 100 days or 200 days and clear up this whole backlog and pass the Hawkins-Humphrey Full Employment Act and do something about national health insurance. And, you know, we ought to put up or shut up on this. But that veto is going to be hard to fight. And we better get rid of him. We better not lose this chance.
Congressman Wayne Ike from Battle Creek, Michigan. None of the candidates previous to your appearance here have spoken on the subject matter of crime. I'd like to get your opinion about crime problem in this country and what you intend to do about it.
Well, I got my start as a prosecutor in Tucson, Arizona, in a place that had a good deal of crime, organized crime. The Purple Gang out of Detroit had a little base out there for a while, and I took them on. We're now the marijuana capital of the world, which is a distinction that the local citizens are not very proud of, but being that close to Mexico. There are no easy answers to crime, and anybody tells you you're going to elect him and crime's going to be wiped out is not leveling with you. Richard Nixon used to go around this country for the last 2 elections, and he'd vote for me, and we are going to get tough and mean and federal judges, and we're going to hang some people every morning on live television, and crime's going to go away. And crime doubled almost during the Nixon years, and one of the greatest increases was right down at the White House and the Justice Department. Somebody remember the book All the President's Men, and there was an old joke about the Allentown, Pennsylvania prison, and they called the library and said, "Do you have all the President's men?" And the librarian said, "No, but we're getting them one at a time." But let me tell you something about the kind of violent crime that makes people hide behind doors and triple lock them at night. You know, here are old people, young people. You go in, we're like we're in a prison somewhere. You got to lock yourself in. You can't go out to the store at night. Disgusting in a country of this kind. But someone asked 6 police chiefs in big cities the other day if they could all agree on any one thing that might do something to reduce crime. And they all agreed. You know what it was? Surprise you. It wasn't police. It wasn't courts. It wasn't helicopters. It wasn't jails. It was jobs, teenage jobs particularly. Half the violent crime in America is committed by kids 18 years of age or under. And the peak year of crime is 15 in the big cities. And when you got 40% of the teenagers unemployed and no hope, you're going to have crime. And we couldn't do any one more single thing to fight crime than to get that Hawkins-Humphrey Full Employment Act on the books and to get a Job Corps and do like we did back in the 30s and take kids off the street and out in the forest and teach them how to run a bulldozer and handle a monkey wrench and become a carpenter, teach them a trade, job. We've got to do that. Now, there's a certain element of the criminal population that we're never going to save. They're violent people, and we ought not to kid ourselves and be soft-hearted and all of this. We ought to put the walls high and get them out of circulation. But most of the young people who get involved in crime could be saved if we had good police, if we'd catch them quick and have courts that would move on their cases quickly and do some things with halfway houses and training instead of locking them in these big institutions where they come out tough and mean and ready for a life of crime. But most of the violent crime that frightens people is state and local crime, and no president's going to do too much about that. The president ought to run the FBI right. We ought to run the federal prison system right. We ought to get organized crime under control. We ought to do something about interstate crime, and we ought to get people jobs and get an economy going where people have hope. Yes, sir.
Rick Celebron from Burbank, California. Congressman, all the candidates who have addressed us here have hit on the subject of putting America back to work. This has become a serious problem, not only in the aerospace industry, which I work out of, but the entire country. The multinational corporations are taking more and more of American jobs and sending them overseas where they can get cheap labor. You as the President of the United States, what position would you take as far as getting the work back here where it belongs and stop our multinational corporations from exporting the work of American jobs?
Well, I take a sensible approach to this, and I get angry when I see jobs that belong to Americans being taken overseas. And I get angry when I see these multinational corporations have more power than nations do, and they're running out of control. We don't control them. They're not controlled where they go. And they're a serious threat to our economy, and they're a serious threat to any kind of a stable world order because no one controls them. And so I think we've got to be doing 2 or 3 things about multinationals. One is we ought to get some tax laws on the books that make them pay a fair share of the taxes here. A lot of these oil companies pay 8 times the taxes to Saudi Arabia that they pay to us. All kinds of Mickey Mouse deals. We ought to be getting some kind of an agreement internationally so that there's some controls on multinationals. We don't control them, and the places where they're going aren't controlled, and we need some kind of an international system that'll set up some ground rules that are fair. We've also got to watch for them or dumping. The auto unions now and others are complaining about dumping, and we ought to enforce the dumping laws that are on the books where it's actually proven that competition is unfair. And I think we have to take a whole new and balanced and sensible look at our policies on foreign trade. Labor, the American people have always been free traders. It's always been the doctrine in America that free trade is good. And it is good when it's fair. You know, we exported last year $110 billion worth of goods. That represents one job out of every 12 or 13 in the American economy, depended on exporting. And you can't export unless you're also willing to import. So, let's not go overboard and put up the tariff walls and try to go back where we were in the 1920s that brought on a recession. Let's be for foreign trade, but let's insist that foreign trade be fair and that you not let multinationals simply export jobs off under sweetheart arrangements to Taiwan and Hong Kong and all of these other places. America can compete if the terms are fair, and we've been kind of suckers. I talked to Walter Reuther in the UAW was always one of the big free traders, and you talk to some of the UAW people now, and they're saying, all right, we're still for free trade, but free trade on fair terms. And I think labor's position ought to be kind of a hard-nosed one that doesn't turn its back on the importance of trading with foreign countries, because so many of our jobs depend on that trade. But the terms haven't been fair, and the multinationals have been getting away with things we shouldn't let them get away with. We ought to tighten up the whole business and enforce the laws that are on the books.
Congressman Chuck Pertain from Houston, Texas, and being from a state where Senator Taft and Hartley took away some of the democratic process to us union people, I would like to know your views on the Taft-Hartley 14B.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because it gives me a chance to give a little lecture here. It'll be a short one. I've got one old vote on 14B that plagues me, and I've got a couple of opponents everywhere I go in Wisconsin or Iowa. They say he voted against the repeal of 14B, and I did in 1965. But let me tell you what happened. And from Texas, you can appreciate this. When I was in college 30 years ago, we had right to work on the ballot in Arizona, and I wrote the pamphlet with my brother that the AFL-CIO used against it. And I went out and made speeches against right to work. 3 times it was on the ballot in Arizona, and I was against it publicly every time. We lost. In the 1950s, we were getting beat in Arizona every race we ran, and when I ran for Congress, with the knowledge and consent of labor and full consultation, we agreed that Democrats weren't going to get anywhere. I remember one of the labor guys saying, there's one thing worse than living with right to work, and that's living with Republicans. And it was. And I took the position publicly that my people had voted for right to work, and that I would not go to Washington and repeal their vote. I would do my best as a citizen to get Arizona to change its mind. And when the vote came up, I kept my pledge that I had made. Labor understood it, and Labor, the head of the AFL-CIO in Arizona is out working for me right now. But I am pledged. I made a public pledge in Cleveland, and I think I'm the only candidate who has made that pledge, that I would do what Lyndon Johnson did. He was from your state, the right-to-work state, where it's a mean, emotional issue, but when he became president, he took the position, he was president of all the people, and he led the fight to repeal 14B, and I am publicly pledged to lead the fight to repeal 14B. If elected, and I will do so. I don't believe in right-to-work laws. They're for freeloaders and free riders. And this is a tough and very emotional question in your kind of state and in my kind of state. And I've been with labor on 90% of the issues, as I said, and 100% the last couple of times around. And I've been with labor all the time on right-to-work. Right-to-work is wrong. And I'm going to be there and lead the fight to repeal it. So when anybody tells you Mo Udall got a bum vote on 14B, that's the story. And I hope some of you fellows from the South will ask Jimmy Carter what his position is on the repeal of 14B. All right, I will. I got another Indian story.
Okay, go with the story.
This goes back to the 1930s, and this, you remember Roosevelt had a program to build outhouses. That was one of the things they were doing to put people to work, and you guys from small towns will know all about outhouses. But the story was that this Indian chief acquired one of these WPA outhouses, and he set it up on the bluff in back of the teepee overlooking the river. And it was there a few days, and one time during the night it was pushed off and rolled down into the river, and the chief was very angry. And he called all of the braves together, and he said, Chief, ask who push outhouse off cliff. And there was no answer. And he said, Chief, ask again, who push outhouse off cliff? There's no answer. He said, "Chief, tell story. Many moons ago, great white father cut down cherry tree. A great white father's father say, George Washington, who cut down cherry tree? And great white father say to father, Father, I cannot tell a lie. I cut down cherry tree. Pat him on head, say, good boy, George, never tell a lie." Said, "Now, Chief, ask again, who pushed outhouse off cliff?" And one of the braves raised his hand and said, "I did." And Chief said, "Come forward," and took his tomahawk and bashed him around the head and shoulders, and the Indian got up bleeding and very unhappy. He said, "Don't understand. The great white father tell great white father's father cut down cherry tree, cannot tell a lie, pat him on head, say, good boy, George, never tell a lie. I tell Chief, push house off cliff, beat hell out of me." Chief said, "Very different. Great white father's father not sitting in cherry tree when cut down."
Congressman, it appears as if there are no further questions, and that might be a very, very happy note on which to end your visit.
Right.
We're delighted that you could take time out of your busy schedule, come over here and give us your views on these important questions. Thank you very much.
Wouldn't really be happening now. One of the items he covered is we got the relief situation. Giving relief to the people that are old and injured and crippled and can't work. They ought to work for a living. They ought to earn their living. How are you going to work for a living if you don't provide opportunities for people to work for a living? Then he said you got to do something about the problem. Then he said, you know, they really shouldn't be getting food. They ought to be out working. When workers strike, they shouldn't be entitled. Their unions ought to take care of them, and not the people and not the government. So we ought to food stamps for strikers. Then he said, you know, the unions again are going to be out to try to change the Hartley Act. Now we got to make 14B in, because he said that's the right to work, and that's the right for people to get a job, for full employment. You ought to have the right without paying tribute to a union. On about the things completely to the desires and the wishes of the people of this country. And he said something that I thought was he then said he had been around the world in the many countries, down in Southeast Asia and Vietnam. Again went through the old acts about problems over there. He said, well, we should be doing something for relief for the people. We shouldn't be giving food stamps to people. So make sure we increase more arms and ammunition to the people in Vietnam. Because otherwise you're going to lose all of Southeast Asia. Same old stories that we've heard for many, many years. And I say it is important that you are here. It's important that you are here. After listening to the discussion of the workshop, form your own what needs to be done and what's good for America. Then go up on Capitol Hill. Lobby with the administration. Let your voice be heard. Because having a strong, vocal labor movement, can we guarantee the new administration and the new Congress properly respond and represent the people and the issues that are good for the people.
Thank you very much for doing what you always do, telling it like it is. Response you got. Target. Pat has told you a little bit about leading up to this conference. I am inordinately proud of my standing up here today. I'm proud of every one of you and local and district lodges who are responsible. They have responded of beefing up our participation in this by providing us the kind of takes for a successful conference. I'm happy to tell you there are over 850. I hope, I guess that leaves the rest. I hope that by Wednesday noon, you can look over your shoulder. We have responded to the challenge. A very productive conference. To all of you, and think the conference was a success of your participation. Your agenda. Next, going to panel discussion. For what purpose does my friend at Mike 6? For what purpose does Mike 6? Mike 6? Friend Pat Greathouse from the UAW.
I think we certainly appreciate the sentiment that contribution is said by inviting those of us here. Made the arrangement. The union is taking care of the cost of the people coming in unemployed. We can handle it very well. We appreciate it. I don't think it's necessary. Thank you very much.
Have a panel discussion. As I said, we're going to have a panel discussion this morning, and it focuses on three of our, all of which directly affect as well as our ability to support our families. And they are inflation, energy, and the multinational corporations. Inflation obviously destroys our jobs, the ability of our members to purchase, shortage first destroys first by contributing, and secondly, sounds of industrial facilities. Multinational corporations destroy our jobs, exporting them overseas. And in the hopes that we can enlarge our understanding of these problems and what Congress should not do about them, we're going to have a panel which brings together three people who know as much about their particular specialty as country. Dr. Arlen Tucker and Ray Dennison. Before I introduce them individually, let me call your attention to the cards that have been distributed, or at least I hope they are. They're provided so that questions which you may care to ask the panel. And if you don't find cards handy, scrap paper out of your kit, write down the question, and send it up to me. Now let me introduce it. He comes to us from the Research Department of the morning to discuss an economist. This morning to discuss an economic phenomenon in America, and that's the impact on jobs. Brother Mark Roberts. Based upon them, and based upon that, take a long walk this morning. Let me say, welcome to, and congratulations. My condolences. because I can all day. All day. Know me. Know me. Maybe attending your first. Attending your first. The singer. Our session. And for the next. Our sessions. Mr. Chairman, I want to. And attended prior. Who have attended prior 73 and 74. Notice that there's something a little. And I'm not going to dwell on it. And I'm not going to dwell on it. But previously, about equally divided. And members of the. And today, circumstances which, as the UAW token numbers, people. This conference last fall meant that this would be conference. The men and women factories primarily, and every tremendous cutbacks, short and hit in that regard. The country hurt anywhere near as bad. And of course that for anybody. Some wag in our country today is employment claims. Just one fact. As I say, in relatively. Imagined goals and programs very closely together in the future. I'll make that very plain at the outset. Their absence. Purpose to it all. Also note that when the unusual came about, it made it extremely difficult to muster an organization to carry on. And where the give was near canceling this conference. We must go ahead in cooperation with you. We did that because we very really valuable. Generate momentum. Kinds of programs. That the conference measure it by legislative justify the investment. District lodges who have made it. One that we have in the Machinists. And we're here. All of those issues that and the well-being of our members. And we're here to try to find tough and difficult people up at the, you ought to know and recognize to you. Right, Midwest Territory. Midwest Territory. The EIM in charge of the EIM in charge of an international conference. President Mike Ragus. IAM General Secretary. Next. Officers in the UAW. Vice President. For a moment and go over to my General Vice President Bob Simpson. General Vice President in charge. Vice President. Then we go to the far west again. President Frank Meager. Man of the IAM squad. The IAM squad. John is another chap. More fully in a few moments. With that, try to start this conference off. I can't think of anyone more. Serving with at Grand Lodge. My opinion, he's given 6 years now to a meeting of machinists. Our international president, President Floyd Smith.
Thank you, Wimpy.
Thank you.
Vice President Whippensinger. UAW is not official, as they were the last. Now their members are standing. In those lines. The IFM has probably the overall workforce. Happening to despite all the serious problems, decided to go ahead sponsorship. But our congressman and earn their living with Congress. The newspapers, farm organizations, producers, the various departments. Well, it's a good time to give them some. Going to be about Ford. For President Ford, and recommend they cut it. No policy. Income tax. And it's the rest of the that worries me. And it's the rest of one hand, and so do we all. And so do we all. Conserve oil is for fairly to all Americans.
fairly to all Americans. One. An extra 15. An extra home. To heat your home. Your tax cut. What put the economy in? Every cent to dry their cars. They have homes or anything else. Started off with the Arabs. Now it's even more. Wants to hurt the Americans. I don't think he's evil. I do think he's some awful bad advice. Some awful bad advice. More than merely heating our home. Oil prices, the manufacturing and distributing sold in the United States. It will mean more inflation. It will mean more inflation. Buying Cadillac. Buying Cadillac. Buying Cadillac. Don't. They can. They can. And that's most of it. And that's most of it. Gas tax, Mr. Ford, equivalent. In terms of an income, he's taking away. Taking away. The threat of possible by the sheikhs and the shah. By the sheikhs and the shah. He's got plenty of dollars. He's got plenty of dollars. The way to conserve oil, indeed, rather than a dose. The American people are not. The American people, but they share for the long run. For the long run, we would like to. We would like some. This country with capable leadership. Franklin D. Roosevelt, when he set up the bomb, Kennedy gave in the 19th. NASA. I mean the kind. I mean the kind. On the financial. And this nation. That this. The knowledge of energy from solar. Tidal, from solar. Other sources. Period of time. 2.6. Already. People. With the right kind of leadership. Hundreds of thousands. Another. Making right here. This word meeting. A million. What will it will? Higher oil prices. Of course. Economic legislative. The problem is solved. Whether we can
employment. Related issues cannot be solved at the bargaining table. We decide to go ahead. For example, concerns about the way our stripping exporting countries overseas. Almost 350 were unemployed. Lost their companies. Productivity. Hong Kong, Taiwan. Today, 20%. 40%. 60%. And high all TVs shoes in the United States are produced mostly by American. Will it your representative know how you feel about these? For example, ways to whip inflation, lower interest rates, food and fibers, competition, power, the 200, and now control, production, upon capital, working people, by another one. I'm talking about these. Days. Many eloquent. You're going to be delegates. You're going to be with Congress. Help to elect. Take time while you are here in your delegate. You will take them back home. Take them back home. If you are Washington will while you are here. By the time even deeper in.
And thank you very much for providing that we need to those problems that we're going to 2.5 days. Gives us a penetrating insight. Such as this takes a lot of time. And one of the most important when we make such plans, we get speakers, any speaker, of course, but and often that can be a long process, and often that didn't happen to us in the speaker we got of for the United States House of Representatives. House of Representatives. Integrity appeals far beyond the boundaries. Far beyond the boundaries. Came to the Senate. Works Committee, considered to be a terrible, but he made it himself, becoming the chief advocate of now. Shows our next 1968. Find out. Who is one of the most of modern times. Especially appealed, many of whom were tuning out. Time. Had the right to vote. Had the right to vote, as they did it. I don't think Spiro presidency of the United States in the first place. Join me in giving a warm welcome to the senior senator.
Pat Greathouse, my good friend, to be too enthusiastic. And it's to be too enthusiastic. To come back in my native cold month of January. Either. They find people. I find people about this whole business. That's not only independent. That's because of the president. A friend said to me, Senator, that Patrick without representation. He ought to see what it's like. He ought to see what we all know that there are encouraging Democratic and very personal basis. But we also less than 45 to vote. The reason he stayed home contained in a conversation on Waterville, Maine. To go to the polls. She said, it only encouraged. Understand what she means. I've gone back to Maine with experiences to the president on this long grassroots tour. And after an older young man, for that I might say. I liked what you said. Next time around, anybody down there now. 17 days. I happen to be the day that the State of the Union, and I listened to 100 Maine constituents happen to have been to an economic in Portland, Maine. And as I listened to it, I another Maine story. An obsolete. They govern themselves. This problem all day long. There's three-part. The new jail. Built out of be used until I think that's a pretty good economic plan. With crowds, the dimensions. But let me do. Let me say to you this morning. The fact is, nearly 7 million Americans. 7 million. And there could be a million. There could be a million. Recession. The 1930s. The need. A lot of parties. I think that matches and needs, and that. But there is one advice I have recently in a budget. Said the economist and the president who won't say, well, on we should put some money back in the economy. You should take it by driving up a gallon of gas. Within 48 hours of that speech, I was tramping in the Texas. And you know, already they didn't need. They had figured it out. Every one of those. The mold. That wasn't. In a matter. Start putting money. Acting to stop taking it out again. The price of oil. But as we move on, it would be wrong to assume this will be anything of moving again without touch. The policy tax price management. It's about investment. Choice is about with the rest of the world. With us, generation. What we are about. Beginning of the new is too critical without some facts. Analysis of just the President's proposal. Any proposal. State of the Union message. State of the Union message. Is likely to be by summer. Auto workers, as I understand, Woodcock's figures, it's close to 200 at the present time. The machinists, the airline is tumbling. That it will hit this year in December. Gross national product 9%. Rate that means 120 of federal for the first 47 inflation driving down fast rough balance in the red. No, this picture. Those of you the black statistics. 2 weeks ago, the proposal gathering storm. There are many packages. Problem is this. It won't work. It will leave down. It will jobs. And it will stimulate inflation. The President's proposal. It resembles an old tri-motor airplane. But they need. But the third is coming back. But the program. The upshot is that the program won't get off. The President's $12 billion would go to and $4 billion will run. Formula $1,000, $40,000, $100 needs to be turned to get more of the money low and middle. And may I point out that total, if as much, the unintended tax increase by the progressive nature tax system of inflation pay increase. Figure alone, $1 billion to restore what was taken away in is the president reduce taxes by six another reductions and may work, but it's oil and natural stall. It would cancel of the other can't be fixed. The only way to deal with it and are the threat of an to our national, and they will not do the president. Oil cartel, abstinence, not by the level that the nations are now 30 million barrels plans by 2 million barrels by 1977. Oil producing for that by raising for their customers a barrel. Will the president a long, hard main annual other areas very heavily prices 10 cents a gallon. Airline 21 is not going to help. Living up. Of living up. 3% American family to ensure double for a long, and it will cancel out the economic stimulus of the two parts of the so that the economy will not a turnaround that we must decrease foreign oil. Term proposition. And the administration crash aside from not recovery to accept the that economic effects cheaper tax proposed about what they want only distribute the available already cut oil use. On one day, to the hearing, average citizen, impact of the upon them. Testify to the fact, in terms of their consumption, they were an additional prices they're already forced them to requirements. They are in order to pay for the bill themselves, depriving themselves and their children, depriving themselves of some of the other necessities. Stay alive. Stay alive. Say to them, that they need another price incentive to persuade them to save more. Save more. Tragic. 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 Anything unanimous. Never been unanimous. Unanimous. Developed intruders, independent. If there's anything that it is the president's today. The president said during his less than during the entire period of World War II racket. And the poll showed that people supported the program and asked. Alternative. America is going to cut back. If we're going to buy with less, and surely let's share about where the burden falls, about where and not kill our hope of an the president says a ration, that kind of, I think, because the country cannot afford to have the administration at longer. Have not been for so long that on some. And so he's those who can lead. Perhaps there is a way to stretch over so that it is not now. Still encourages part of the compromise stand by a plan in place in case but I tell you this, I am not going to be part of any policy that forces new taxes, higher prices on the American consumer. Out market discriminates against those regions of the country hold upon high price American to a tail. That's my message. Capitol Hill. And I think that's the majority from Capitol Hill. Fundamental flaw is that it is on energy with not enough jobs and he listed the number of new oil well and nowhere does he list nowhere does he show the for the real to America. President's advice. 2 million barrels of oil a day. Very little. Father in Detroit, bringing home a cannot pay the Congress has the president's plan, and his budget comes a week from today. The Senate leadership and other senators a specific alternative job, count of jobs, Congress. Don't expect Congress decision that will mark Congress better than that. But policy emerges from conflict and compromise. We will listen. We will take into account this proposal. Justice, government is not an exact science. Government and in the final analysis, government decisions of Congress will be based on the real people in our states and districts who let us know directly what their problems are. They've got a right to be heard in the development of a new economic approach. And I can assure you of this. I can assure you of this. There is a great sense of urgency in Congress, and as the tugging and hauling over these basic policy choices, remember that it is part of a democratic process that has served us for practically 200 years. It has seen us through good times and through good, and I am confident that it will see us through these times. Because the people on Capitol Hill are not listening just to the economy, almost as the Democratic Party. We are not just reading the statistics. We are listening to the clerks in Russell, Maine, and the jobless workers in Detroit, and their counterparts across the state. We are saying firsthand the dreadful cost of this recession to America. We know firsthand the strength and resources our economy can generate at full speed. Say this final word. Strike home. Strike home. To this kind. An audience of labor unions, an audience of working men and women, an audience of leaders in the ranks of labor, all of your working lives, all of your represent, all of your is of 200 million. When official policy as to the ability of this and produce what they in the country need. I was just a boy in the early 30s. And I'm not going to try to liken the present situation to that. I was a college freshman. One thing I recall about that is that it was still possible in those black days, those right kind of leaders to mobilize people in this fundamental values which have made this country strong and strong, and the right man came along. But what I emphasize is not the man as the people, is not travel around. As I travel around among the people of my state, and I've done it for 18 days this month on a scale that hasn't been possible to do for a long time because I've been preoccupied with other things across the country. What struck me was that at the same time, that the last out against the inequities of the president's program, at the same time that they hastened to describe in dramatic detail the impact it would have on the substance of their lives, there came through that determination to deal with whatever the future brings. So they believe in this country. All they ask those of us who are politically behind their political leaders, all they ask of us is that we believe in them. We respond. that we understand their problems. Try our best to avoid making those problems. That's not an unreasonable proposition. The people of this country, for their president and their Congress. And it's that proposition that is going to guide the Congress as it struggles with problems. The Congress sometimes to prolong discussion. I think we need action. Considerably the middle of March of before the first I think we need to reassure the people of this country that as unemployment deepens, if it does, that there will be a job available. Not just added weeks of unemployment, in a private sector stimulated effectively by tax cut at the federal level, on public sector, on essential and needed public service. There is tied up an impounded fund here in Washington, $19 billion. Two presidents now have impounded that were authorized by the Congress to construct waste treatment facilities and highways. They've been tied up for 3 years. And in every state in this country, there are projects ready to go to bid. Projects ready to stimulate a depressed construction industry. Projects which would produce public jobs and also private jobs. $19 billion. And to put ready to go to work and to put people to work if the president could only see his way to unleash that's the kind of jobs American people want. They don't want leaf-raking jobs, although those could be better than nothing. They want constructive jobs. They would clean up our rivers. Build the necessary roads. Build the essential mass transportation systems to deal with the energy crisis and all these other things. So for those who really want to address themselves, want to address the real needs of the American people, there are opportunities available. And I pledge to you, and I pledge organized, and I think all the words, this organized body that I speak of my compatriots. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak to you this morning. Luck and God bless you as you go back and your constituents.
I don't want to get it very far, but if I could just 2 or 3 minutes. And I want that studied by really done. They're trying to find out. feed my wife. Done it. Right. Good money. Security?